This episode of the podcast is brought to you by J.D. Chapman Insurance Agency. Are you an aspiring business owner or entrepreneur looking to be part of New York's multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry? If so, the decisions you make in these early stages are imperative to your future success. And I'll tell you from personal experience that you will face risk on a daily basis. So it's important to have a comprehensive insurance program in place with a trusted, reliable partner. J.D. Chapman offers special insurance for cannabis growers, medical and adult use dispensaries, edibles manufacturers, testing labs, ancillary businesses, and more. Available coverage includes general liability, product liability, excess liability, and workers' comp. In this exciting and rapidly growing industry, it's important to have a partner you can trust. Contact J.D. Chapman today at 315-986-4062 for all your cannabis insurance needs. J.D. Chapman, from seed to sale, they have you covered.
The views and opinions expressed on this show belong solely to the hosts and their guests and do not reflect the views of any outside institutions unless explicitly stated.
What's up, everyone? My name is Steve Vanderwall, and I'm the host of Cannabis Cum Laude, a podcast devoted entirely to cannabis. This podcast will cover a full spectrum of topics, including cultivation, business, medicine, politics, culture, advocacy, and everything in between. Because let's face it, the cannabis industry is very complicated. It's robust, and it has a ton of moving parts. So it's going to be my job to help you understand it a little bit better. So tune in every week for a brand new episode. And if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And if you really, really, really like the show and are interested in sponsoring, please shoot me an email at logistics@cannabiscumlaude.com. Now enjoy the show. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cannabis Cum Laude. Really excited to be back today. Really excited to be sitting down with my buddy, Drew Greco, who's been a guest on here before. He is a commercial cannabis consultant and the owner of Green Star Consulting. I speak for him. He's helped me a lot with my stuff. Super, super knowledgeable guy. Really knows cultivation like the back of his hand. And today we're going to take a deep dive into crop steering. Drew, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again. I'm excited to talk about this. So
just for anybody who didn't hear our previous episode, just give a brief background. Why are you qualified to have this conversation today?
Sure. I've been in the legal cannabis industry for a little over 10 years now. I've been managing facilities for about 6 years. I started out in Colorado, just started as a general labor and worked my way up to a cultivation manager, and have recently been in Massachusetts and now Nevada, helping a couple new startups open up their new cultivation facilities. And the facility that we were running here in Nevada got sold at the end of last year. So for the past about 8 months, I've been running my own consulting company and helping companies in new markets either apply for licenses or design their facilities to maximize the potential that they have for a perfect crop on the first run.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, thanks again for coming on the show. This is a topic that I think we both find very interesting as cultivators, and that is crop steering. So at a very high level, what is crop steering, and why as cannabis growers do we use it?
So as we all know, as cannabis growers, the plants have a hormonal system that will regulate their growth, and that regulation is in response to the external conditions, namely the temperature and RH in your room. Some of the other factors that are included in that are your VPD, which again is the difference between your RH and temperature in the room, your CO2, and then your irrigation strategies. So there's different growth strategies for your veg cycle and your flower cycle, obviously. And what you're trying to do with crop steering is maximize your growth potential in the plant by manipulating those different factors in your room and manipulating your irrigation strategies to get the most out of each cycle that the plant is in.
Yeah, it's really, something that I started implementing about a year and a half ago. And already, and I haven't been doing this for years and years. And, especially as long as somebody like you or some of the real legacy people have been. But even in my short time as a cultivator, the quality and the yield improvements that I've seen in implementing this crop steering strategy has been profound. It's really been crazy. So you talked a little bit about, the difference between vegetative steering and generative steering, which is really steering towards, optimizing the flower structure of the plant. Talk to me about the differences between vegetative steering parameters and generative steering parameters.
So, most cultivators or all cultivators should know that there are two different, well, they're the main two cycles that the plant goes through is the vegetative cycle, and then we change the hormonal responses by switching our lights to 12-12 if you're indoor, or when you're outdoors, the seasons change and trigger your plants into flowering. So with vegetative steering, you're trying to inspire vegetative growth, which is your green growth on the plants. I've heard it called shoots and roots for vegetative. You're focusing on the stalks of your plants, the stems of your plants, and the leaves of your plants, as well as developing a strong root structure for that plant. So in the veg cycle, you're trying to mimic spring conditions, which is when the plant would be vegging outside. As far as vegetative steering, those are what I had talked about earlier, the different parameters that you're going to manipulate to get the most out of that cycle. And the plant doesn't have to be in the veg cycle to use those vegetative steering practices. So usually your vegetative steering practices include a lower EC, a higher water content, a lower VPD, and a lower light intensity. So the parameters I'm shooting for when I'm in veg are between 78 and 88 degrees for your ambient temperature, between 65 and 80% for your relative humidity. We're looking for a VPD of 0.8 to a 1.1 kPa, which is kilopascals, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. A lower CO2 between 500 and 800 ppms. And then the other main factor is your irrigation strategy. And that's going to differ between whether you're steering for vegetative or whether you're steering for generative, which is the flower cycle. So in veg, I'll start with this. Your irrigation strategy consists of your shot size, which is the amount of nutrients or liquid that is going into your media every time you water. Your drybacks, which is the percentage of water moisture that you lose in your media between feedings or between shots. The temperature of your substrate, the EC of your substrate, and the water content of your substrate, which is the moisture level in that media. And then the other thing that will change is the irrigation frequency, which is the amount of shots that you're giving throughout the cycle, throughout the day cycle, and the number of times that you're watering throughout that light cycle. Switching to generative, which would be your flower cycle, you're trying to mimic the summer conditions, which is when a plant would flower outside. So we're looking for a lower water content, a higher EC, and a higher VPD. And then, of course, a higher light intensity because the sun is much more intense during the summer. So during flower, we're looking for an ambient temperature between 60 and 78 degrees, relative humidity humidity between 40 and 70%. During flower, you always want a little bit less relative humidity in the room to reduce the chance of any kind of mold or bud rot. Your VPD is going to be a little bit higher, between 1.0 and 1.5 kPa. Your CO2 is going to be higher, between 800 and 1200 ppm. I know some people that go as high as 1600, some people that go up to 2000, but there's been a lot of research showing that plants can't really take up CO2 above 1400 ppm. So the most I'll ever go in a room is 1400 ppm during flower. And then again, your irrigation steering. So your shot size, your dry back, the temperature of your substrate, your EC water content, and your irrigation frequency. So I want to touch a little bit deeper on the irrigation strategy, because that's really what most people are focusing on with crop steering these days. The environmental conditions have been pretty much universal since forever. But the irrigation strategy is really what has been more shared and more prevalent over the past probably 2 or 3 years. So in veg, your shot size, which again is the amount of water that's going into your media each time you feed, you want to be between 1% and 3% of your full substrate volume. In veg, you're looking for a 10 to 15% dry back between each time that you water your plant during the day. Your substrate temperature, you want between 72 and 78 degrees. Your EC, you want between 2 and 4 DS per meter. Your water content is going to be 55 to 70% of your total substrate volume. And that will be the most amount of water that is in your media volume during that day. And then your frequency, which is the number of shots that you're giving per day, is between 6 to 18 shots during the day. It really depends on the system you have and how many times you're able to send water to the plants throughout the day. The schedule that I usually use, I try to water once an hour every hour that the lights are on. So during flower, I'm sending between 16 and 18 shots to the plants because I'm giving them 18 hours of light during the day. In veg. And then in flower, we're giving between 10 and 12 shots per day because your lights are only on for 11 to 12 hours, depending on your DLI, which is your daily light interval, or the amount of light that your plants are able to take in.
Now, are all your shot sizes the same size? Like if if your lights are on for 12 hours during flower, are you, I'm pretty sure for like a 6x6 Grodan block is like a 6%. Forget that. Are you using the same shot size every shot, or is there some sort of ramp up period at the beginning? What does that look like?
There is definitely a ramp up period, and these are what we call the phases of your irrigation schedule. So there's 4 phases. We start with phase 0, which is the moment your lights come on in the morning until the first irrigation shot of the day. Phase 1 is from that time you give your first shot until you reach runoff. Phase 2 is from when you see runoff coming from the plants until the last irrigation schedule of the day, or the last shot that you give your plant for the day. And then phase 3 is from that last irrigation until your lights come on again in the morning. So for phase 0, which again is from when your lights come on until that first irrigation, you want your plants to be transpiring before you give them water in the morning. If your plants aren't transpiring before you give them water, you're going to overwater your media, more chance for root rot, root mold, just a really nasty situation. So by monitoring your plants, you want to see a dry back before you give that first irrigation in the morning. And we're really looking for about a 30% dry back from the last irrigation that you gave the night before to the first irrigation in the morning. And then from your first irrigation until you see runoff, you want to give between 1 and 3 shots before you see runoff. Really, the best way to maximize the growth potential of your plant is giving that plant the most amount of shots you can give before you see runoff. So I'm always aiming for at least 3 shots before I see runoff coming out of that plant or coming out of the media of your plant. And the way you calculate this is by taking the total media volume that your plant is in. So if you're in a 1 gallon pot, you have 1 gallon of media, which I'm sorry, I didn't do the math on this, but you're going to want to obviously convert that to milliliters because that's what most people are measuring their shot size as. So you have your X number of milliliters that your media can hold. And then you want to divide that. You want to subtract your 30%, you want to subtract your 50 to 70% wherever you're aiming to have your total water content at between that 50 to 70%, which it would be in veg. And then we're subtracting 30% from that because you want a 30% dry back from the night before until your first shot. And then we're going to divide whatever that difference is by 3 because I want to give 3 shots before my media is totally saturated and I see runoff. So those first 3 shots are going to be pretty small. It's usually about 1 to 3% of the total media. And that's going to build up over those 3 shots, completely saturate your media, and then you'll see your runoff. And when you see runoff coming out of your plant, you're going to move into phase 1 of your irrigation schedule. I'm sorry, phase 2 of your irrigation schedule. And phase 2, we want to divide into equal shots. And that, again, is just done by the math, your total volume of the substrate, the total moist water content that you want to have in your substrate. And then you're going to divide that by the number of feeds that you want to give during that time period. When your lights go off, or before your lights go off, you want to give your last irrigation feed. I usually don't feed an hour. I give my last feed an hour before the lights are going to turn off. That gives the plant time to transpire, get rid of some of that moisture that's in the media before the lights go off, so that when the lights are off in the dark, the plant is not trying to take up water. The media is not too saturated, and you're not risking getting that mold or mildew or root rot in your media area. Okay. So I want to get back to irrigation in a minute, but I know that you wanted to talk about VPD, and that's another major set point that you're going to be looking at for crop steering. So VPD is the difference between the amount of moisture in the air and how much moisture the air can potentially hold when it's fully saturated. The warmer your room is, the more water content the air is going to be able to hold. The cooler your room is, the less water content your air is going to be able to hold. Your VPD obviously affects transpiration. A lot of people think that the relative humidity in your room determines how much your plant is going to transpire, and it's really the opposite. The amount that your plant is going to transpire affects the relative humidity in the room, because your plant is letting off air, it's bringing in air. Plants are always breathing. So transpiration is how the water and the nutrients move through the plant from cell to cell. It's how the plant regulates its temperature, and it's how the plant pulls CO2 from the air. Um, if your VPD is too small, your peak growth rates are not going to be achieved. You have more of a chance for mold and mildew, and you're just not going to get the growth that you can get if your plant is in the correct environment. If your VPD is too high, your stomata is going to close because it's trying to limit the transpiration. Your plant doesn't want to give off too much oxygen into the air. So it's going to close stomata, and you're not going to get the growth rate that you're looking for. And if your stomata closes and your plant's not transpirating, that's how you get burned plants. You'll see nutrient deficiency, burned leaf tips, curled leaves, things like that. We touched a little bit earlier. We're looking for different VPDs in the veg cycle and the generative cycle. Again, in veg, you're looking for a 0.8 to a 1.1 kPa. In flower, we're looking for a 1.0 to a 1.5 kPa. Your transpiration drives the plant growth, like we just talked about, and your VPD drives the transpiration of the plant. So again, having your VPD in the right area, in the right between those KPAs, is going to give you the maximum amount of growth that you can get from the plant. And
I tell you, I started using a pulse, and
nice.
It's my second run with it. And first I was just using a thermometer and a hygrometer, which is fine. You just have to have a chart or the math, handy. But just being able to have my pulse to my phone, I could be like, oh shit, it's too hot in there. VPD is too high. Let me go turn it down a little bit, or something like that. So, whatever tool we're going to get into this in a second, but any tools that you can use to, it's hard to crop steer without sensors and tools, right? This is it's a different type of cultivation. It's very science, it's very math driven. And in order to really do this accurately and precisely, you do have to have the right tools. If you have the right tools and you have, SOPs and you have parameters, it's really not all that hard, and it will drastically change your game. But like even things like measuring water content, the old lift the block, if you've been doing it for 20 years, you probably can get within that, you probably can get pretty close. But, my point is, if you really want to elevate your cultivation game and take it to the next level, do yourself a favor and invest in tools that will help you accurately monitor these parameters, because it will change your cultivation game.
It is a very technology driven cultivation strategy. Like you said, moisture meters in your media to measure the water content that's in your media, to be able to see exactly what percentage of dryback you're getting between shots, is pretty much imperative. Like you said, you can do it by lifting, and over years of practice, you might be able to get into the right range, but it'll be 1,000 times easier for you if you have the right technology.
Yeah, and chances are, once you get yourself a water content tool, like I use Arroyo, I'm really the spot checker, really happy with it. You'll probably realize that you are grossly underwatering your plants. I realized that. I always thought I was overwatering, and when I started, I was like, is this thing broken? I just bought it. How can my moisture possibly be that low? And I started chasing those new parameters at 60-70% moisture content, and it was just a complete game changer. So invest in yourselves, invest in some tech, because it'll make it worth it.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I wanted to kind of go back to from a little bit earlier in the show, before we get to irrigation strategy again, because that's something that I'm particularly trying to dial in right now. That's, I feel like, the last thing that I really need to perfect. Not the last thing, but one thing that I'm really dialing in now is my irrigation strategy. And one of the things that I didn't realize is that, and you helped me realize this, is that you don't just use veg steering in veg and generative steering in flower, that especially during the flower cycle, you are essentially alternating between vegetative and generative steering. what's that all about? What's that mean?
So again, when you're vegetative steering in the veg cycle, you're aiming for stalk growth, branch growth, leaf growth. When you're steering in the generative cycle or using generative steering points, you're aiming for bud production and solid flower growth. So when you switch from your veg cycle to your flower cycle, you're going to switch your steering from veg to generative. And what I've seen and what I've been doing for about the past 2 years is the first 3 weeks of flower, we're using generative crop steering to promote those node sites, promote bud growth. We want to, once we get into flower, we want to limit the stretch of the plant. We don't want it to keep growing stalk. We don't want it to keep growing leaf. We want it to really set in its height, set in its node spaces, and start growing nodes and start growing flower. Once those node sites have developed and you're starting to see the little spots with little pistils coming out of your node sites, a lot of people are switching back to vegetative irrigation cues. We're not switching the environment to the veg environment, but just the irrigation cues. And again, that goes back to a little bit larger of a shot size, a little bit more dry back, and that's going to promote those bud sites to grow more. And then we'll use those vegetative cues from about the end of week 3 until the end of week 4, 5, or 6, depending on your strain and what you're visibly seeing your plant doing. And then at the end of week 6, at the end of week 4, 5, or 6, whatever you have decided by looking at your plants, you're going to switch back to generative irrigation cues, which is going to promote more terpene production, more trichome production, and really just solidify your buds, fill out your buds, give you a more dense flower structure on your plant. So that's that, again, what we talked about earlier. There's a veg cycle and a flower cycle, and you can use your vegetative cues or your flower cues in either of those cycles to manipulate your plant to grow the way you want it to grow. And to the opposite of what I just explained, if you're in veg and your plants are stretching like crazy, just out of control node spaces, you could switch your irrigation cues to generative to try and shorten those node sites, keep your plant from stretching like crazy, and produce more bud out of your plant instead of stalks and leaves.
Yeah, and like you said, and I just want to be clear about this, when you're switching back to, after day 21, which is generally after your big defol, at least for me, I do, which that makes sense to me why you would switch back to more vegetative, because you just plucked half your vegetative growth off. I've noticed, like, within it's naked pretty much when you pluck them at 21. 2 weeks later, it doesn't even look like the plant was touched. It is remarkable how fast these plants rebound, and that's how I remind myself to switch back to veg steering, is after that day 21 defol. But like Drew said, you're only changing to the vegetative irrigation strategy. You're not lowering your VPD. You're not, raising your humidity. You're not dropping your CO2. These vegetative changes are only in irrigation, right? You're not changing your environment. So just to piggyback off that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that I did want to talk about, we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the tools that I've used, the Arroyo for, moisture content, Pulse for environmentals, and VPD specifically. What are some tools that you recommend that you use that, our audience may be interested in trying out?
The main things that you need are obviously a temperature sensor, a relative humidity sensor, and then the biggest tool that you had touched on earlier is your water content or moisture meter, which is going to plug directly into your media and tell you what the water content or moisture content of your media is currently. And that's really the only way to get an exact number for A, your water content, and B, the percentage that you're letting your media dry back between irrigation cues.
I just upgraded to the Trollmaster platform, and
nice.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it because it comes obviously with all the sensors and everything, but it also has a moisture content that I'll be able to read right on my phone. With the Arroyo, you have to be there in person, which is fine. But if I'm away from the garden, and I can see, and I've always kind of wanted to do this, and I'm sure it exists. We time irrigation based on dryback, but it would be really cool if you could, if you had this all, this fully integrated system like the Aqua X and the Hydro X, with the Trollmaster, that when that, rather than having it be 1 hour apart, your irrigations, whenever that sensor hit back that 3 to 5%, it auto triggered your irrigation. So now you're doing it more on, it's more precise rather than every hour. You know what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
I'm excited to be able to monitor that in real time. Yeah.
And Trollmaster is capable of doing that now. And the GrowLink is capable of doing that now. GrowLink has, a full facility package where they'll monitor your temperature, relative humidity, CO2, light intensity, and they have a water moisture meter that can integrate with all of those other things. So you pull up your screen and you get a nice chart with your temperature, relative humidity, CO2, light intensity, and your water content. And in their software, you can program your irrigation strategy to water based on dryback percentage.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is.
I was touring a facility in Massachusetts a couple months ago, and they used GrowLink and kind of showed me the whole interface, and I was like, "Wow, this is fucking cool." It was really cool, and it was really clean and really nice user interface, and it was showing me, "Oh, here's flower room 1. It's at this percent dryback. Flower room 2 is getting watered right now. It's all connected to all the the valve, the cyno." It was just it was so cool.
It's awesome.
Much a tech-heavy practice.
Yeah, and the other program is one that I talked about briefly on the last episode is Trim, and Trim started as a task management software for large facilities, and they now can integrate with GrowLink. So all in one program, you can monitor all of your environmentals, monitor your irrigation schedule, and be able to send tasks to all of your employees in the facility, as well as send messages to all of your employees in the facility. They have an internal like chat room type thing. So everyone that is logged into the system is able to see messages throughout the day from each other. So Trim accompanied with GrowLink is really what I use when I'm designing facilities to be able to monitor and control the facility all from one program.
Yeah, and like you said in the last episode, not to go too off track, but if you're, if you're managing multiple rooms or, you're bigger than a home grow and you're a commercial facility, task management is everything. And, like you said, no more whiteboards, no more chalkboards, no more this, being able to have a set list of tasks that auto sends it out to your employees. I mean, it's time is money in this business, whether you're, accomplishing tasks or time in the garden, and just being able to use tools like this is really going to step your game up in every way.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, as somebody who has, worked with some very successful large scale facilities and as a grower yourself, what have you personally seen in crops that have optimized, their crop steering in terms of yields, cannabinoid content, terpenes, etc.?
Crop steering is going to give you an overall healthy plant, so everything improves. I was running the facility here in Nevada when we first came out here, and we had control master in the facility, so we were able to monitor everything. But the people that we took over the facility from were not using any type of crop steering. They weren't set to VPD, and it was kind of just all over the place. So when we came into the facility, they were averaging, I think, about 40 grams per square foot, between 40 and 45 grams per square foot. Before we got crop steering integrated, we had brought those yields up to about 52 grams per square foot. When we implemented, really what we changed in that first period was just the environment. We stuck to our VPD and veg and flower. We made sure our relative humidity and temperature were in their parameters during both periods. And that alone gave us a higher yield of about 10%. Once we switched to a crop steering irrigation cycle, we saw our yields go from that 55 grams per square foot up to close to 100 grams per square foot. So we almost doubled our yields just by switching to that irrigation strategy. And with those yields coming up, we had higher THC percentages. We had higher terpenes percentages by almost 2%. I think it was like 1.7% that we increased our terpenes. So it's absolutely incredible what crop steering will do to maximize the potential of these plants.
Man, going from what you said they originally started at 40, 47, 42?
Yeah, there's like between 40 and 50 grams per square foot. And those same strains, we were hitting close to 100 grams per square foot.
Doubling your yield and increasing TAC. Terpene. I mean, that's leveling up your game. I mean, you are a completely different business at that point.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you could point myself and the listeners in the direction of any good educational materials for growers who are looking to, really step up their game and really start to implement crop steering. Are there any educational materials that you could recommend to us?
Yeah, there's a lot of articles and stuff. Just if you Google crop steering, there's a lot of stuff. Real quick, going back to VPD, calculating VPD is a crazy math problem. If you're going into your room and you want to just use your leaf surface temperature, your relative humidity, and the temperature in your room to calculate your VPD, you can Google it. You can find the math problem online. It's insane. I almost don't understand it. So there are charts already out there for you. If you Google VPD chart, there's a couple of different variations, but they're all really very similar. And they will tell you they have, a yellow zone, a green zone, and a red zone, and you want to be in the green zone. And I can't remember if it's temperature on the side and humidity on the top or the other way around, but they'll tell you exactly what temperature and what humidity you want to be in to reach the right VPD. So definitely look for those instead of trying to do the math problem, because it's going to be way easier for you. As far as guides, there's a lot of them out there. You mentioned Arroyo before. They were really like the first people to bring crop steering to the public and to start educating the public on crop steering. Before, it was kind of just a lesser known trade secret. There was a lot of people doing it, but they weren't sharing those secrets because they were hitting yields of 4 or 5 pounds of light, and they weren't trying to give out that information to other people. Arroyo was, in my opinion, really the first people that shared those secrets and wanted everyone to be able to cultivate properly. I mentioned Trim earlier. That was the guide that I sent to you to help you with your crop steering. They have an amazing crop steering guide that you can get from their website. Their Instagram, I think, is trim.tech, and on their saved posts, you can go and download their crop steering guide. GrowLink, again, who integrates with Trim, they have a good crop steering guide. It's really Trim and GrowLink's guides are exactly the same. So any of those are great resources. They break it down. They give you the formulas for figuring out your water content and your shot size and all of that. So trim and Grow Link or Arroyo are really the best three right now.
Good to know. Yeah, and what I'll do is, if it's okay with you, that trim guide, I think I can post the link in the show notes with your information too. So if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to you.
Yep, definitely.
Well, this has been, I'm over here taking notes because, like I said, I realize how I think, I'm always trying to improve every run, little tweaks here. And I really knew that my last thing that I really need to dial in to get the success that I want was my irrigation strategy. And I think I walk out of here, I think I'll be able to do that now. So I really, really, really want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, sharing your information. This is, like you said with Arroyo, this was all information that was kept close to the chest for so long because it is crazy valuable, to be able to pull 4 or 5 pounds a AAA grade cannabis per light is, really sets you ahead of the pack. So, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and be willing to share with all of us growers, new and old. We really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come on the show again. It was a good time.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity and always love hanging out with you. So
yeah, man. Yeah. Absolutely. So if anybody has any questions, reach out to Drew. He's a wealth of knowledge, obviously. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Feel free, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks to our friends here at Rockbox Recording and Production in Rochester, New York. They are a full professional podcast and video studio designed by a radio guy for podcasters. Audio, video, voiceovers, editing, whatever. Mouth off at rockbox.com.
You can follow Cannabis Cum Laude on LinkedIn and all other social media platforms, as well as Cannabuzz. And if you'd like to help support the show, search up Cannabis Cum Laude on Patreon. And of course, all of those links are in the show notes. Thanks for watching and listening.